Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mayanne Grace. I'm the Head of Projects at the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce. I also lead and manage Circular Edinburgh in partnership with Zero Waste Scotland to help the city become more circular, to help companies embed circular economy principles, and to support circular economy projects. Just some housekeeping. Please can you keep yourselves on mute? You will get a chance to ask questions during the chat box or during the Q&A session later on. The session will be recorded, but it's just for internal purposes. It won't be shared externally. So just for the agenda today, the City of Edinburgh Council launched their draft 2030 climate strategy. So we'll be hearing from Paula McClay shortly regarding the strategy and the key points. We'll also hear from Mayor Michelle from Australia, one of the circular economy businesses that we've supported since 2018. And then we're going to open to Q&A and give all the businesses a chance to feedback on the strategy, because the City of Edinburgh Council, we want some feedback from businesses. So I'm very delighted to hand over to Paula McClay, Policy and Insight Senior Manager at the City of Edinburgh Council. Over to you, Paula.
Thanks, Mayanne. And I think we're having a presentation shared. There you go. Hi, so thanks for having me here today. We're delighted to have this conversation and to share the work we've been doing on the city climate strategy. And more importantly, to hear from businesses, both your reflections on the strategy, but how we can collaborate to get to a net zero city by 2030. Maya mentioned that this is a council strategy. It is, insofar as we are facilitating and leading the drafting of it, but it's being framed really explicitly as a city strategy. So it recognises, for example, that the council is 3% of the city's carbon emissions, that the public sector is around about 12% taken together of the city's emissions, and that collaborating and working with the different sectors, industries and partners across the city will be the only way that we reach our target. So the content of this strategy does take a city view, and it does also, in terms of the next steps and actions, try to reflect the major contributions that other city partners need to make in order for us to deliver change that we want. So next slide. Which brings us on to who's the strategy for. So it's worth saying this because different audiences exist in the city when you talk about climate change, and when you write a strategy like this. We are targeting in this strategy as a 10-year approach. So we are targeting those organisations and partners that have a duty to transition to net zero, even if it is to a 2045 target. Those that have a significant city footprint, so large organisations and partners, no matter what sector they're from, whose presence in the city is such that they are contributing significantly to our carbon footprint. And importantly, those with the power, the budgets and the drive to make impactful change, either individually in their own right or collectively as a combined effort. Having said that, I mentioned some stats just now about sectors and partners' contributions to the city emissions. We are very, very aware in drafting this strategy, which does focus on creating the right framework for collective action to get to 2030, that 54% of the city's emissions actually come from citizens, communities and wider small businesses in the city. So while we are kind of taking a very strategic approach in this strategy, we're also trying to balance that with recognition that it is a multiplicity of individual actions by citizens and in communities and the wider business community that will also underpin our journey towards a net zero city. That's a really difficult balance to strike in the document. So you'll see it's 108 pages plus long. And hopefully this presentation helps to cut through some of that detail, but it's there for those partners who wish to dig into it at different chapters and across the piece, the evidence that exists. Next slide. And first and foremost, what we wanted to do in the strategy was be really clear that what we're working towards in 10 years, and really complementing and building on the work that you might be familiar with around the city vision and the thematic, what citizens and partners across the city really told us they wanted Edinburgh to be in 2050. Building on the work that we've done in our community plan for the future of the city, being fairer and more equitable, and developing that very in keeping with those thematic areas, but from a net zero perspective, focusing on the nature of how we live in the green space, the access to local services, the type of homes we will be living in, the ways in which we might be working, but also how we travel, what that means for not just the villages of the city, but also the city centre, for business and our jobs, the way in which we are trained and skilled, but also in how resilient the city is and becomes to climate change. We've seen, before we everyone joined, the speakers were just touching on how much flooding there's been recently, and of course how we are prepared to manage that and respond to it and prevent it from happening, being part of the vision for the city. The only other thing to say is that framework, I think, is building an ever more consistent vision for the city across all the city strategies, be it the economy strategy, the net zero strategy, city plan, city mobility plan. It is coming together with this coherent vision of what Edinburgh would look like and what that means to citizens over the next 10 to 20 years. Next slide. Before I get into a little bit more of the meat, it is always worth pointing out that terminology in terms of climate action can be somewhat confusing. We talk about absolute reductions in carbon emissions, we talk about carbon neutrality, we talk about net zero, and sometimes that can be used interchangeably. To be absolutely clear, what we focus on in this strategy is twofold: net zero, and there's a definition here which I will read out, and that is where any greenhouse gas emissions put into the atmosphere are balanced out by the greenhouse gas emissions removed from the atmosphere, so that we have a net effect of zero emissions. What's important about this is that it does open a conversation for the city about the place and role of offsetting, but only once all the major actions have been taken and not as a strategy in itself. So that's covered in the strategy. And also we focus on how we are, through the climate strategy, not just addressing our emissions, but ensuring that the city is adapting to the impact of climate change, both now and in terms of the risks we face as a city from flooding and extreme climate, but also those predicted into the future, and building our own resilience to those impacts, and protecting our economy, our businesses, our buildings, our services, our citizens. Next slide. The strategy itself, I've mentioned, is long, and it's long because this is a complicated subject matter that touches on almost every strand of policy and work that you can come across for the city, and also every sector and stakeholder. Hopefully, and we've built it so that you could engage with any particular chapter and really engage with it as a whole document, but also in its chapters. The way in which we've developed the strategy is to give sufficient focus to both empowering and engaging citizens, recognising that 53% of the city's emissions come from individual citizens. Really thinking about how we create the right environment in the city for the sustainable choices to be the easiest and the best choices, and also the cheapest or most rewarding. And that is you know, taking a very strategic agenda to what are very personal, individual behaviour changes by our citizens, how the city can work together to make that more possible. We focus in on net zero and climate resilient development and growth, recognising that this city is set to grow. It's set to grow physically, it's set to grow in terms of population, and, you know, as we recover, it's set to grow economically as well. And for us, thinking about how that can be done sustainably, with zero emissions is really important, and making sure that as we physically grow the city, we are also maximising the opportunities to make it more resilient. We cover in the heat and energy chapter two strands which are both significant. So it is a big strategy chapter with a lot of content. We talk about how the opportunities for the city in having a more strategic approach to heat and energy generation, renewable energy generation, and planning that not just in heat networks, but also in renewable energy opportunities, how we put a strategic framework around that, and how we maximise the opportunity that it presents for the city and partners to invest in the energy frameworks for Edinburgh, which as a growing city will have growing needs. But we also focus in on energy efficient buildings, and we recognise that, you know, we've got a historic city. We've got a historic city with a very complicated physical context. So we have significant tenements, they're historic in many places, they're mixed tenure. We've got significant and old public buildings. You think about the council, we have over 400 public buildings that we need to make net zero and retrofit so that they are net zero. Over 30% are over 100 years old. There's a significant challenge, not just for public sector bodies, although we have a particular duty, but more generally for any large building owners. In addition, we have the public-private owner, domestic buildings that also need to be retrofitted. And that again has its own complexities and challenges, not just from a technology point of view, but also from a funding point of view. Across all of those strands, we're obviously looking for the opportunities for supply chain growth as the needs in these areas develop, opportunities for job creation, and opportunities for a green recovery to the city and supporting that over the next decade. Within the net zero transport's been one of the most, I don't want to use the word intransient with transport, but it has been one of the most intransient areas. We've seen limited impact on our transport emissions. And it is natural in one sense because it's so embedded with the infrastructure, the public transport infrastructure and the private infrastructure that exists. The city mobility plan has set out a really strong vision for enhancing the public transport, enhancing active travel in the city, and trying really overtly to make it a city where you don't need a car to get around, but it also recognises that there are infrastructure challenges for those people who do need a car to get around, but also for the travel of goods and business services across the city, and how we can collaborate on what that looks like, particularly when it comes to EV infrastructure for the city. In terms of business skills, across all of this, you can see that, you know, we lay out the challenge we're in at the moment. It's compounded, the climate challenge is compounded by recovering from the last period of lockdown and a global pandemic. So the question that we're posing within this is how do we ensure that as we recover from the impact of the global pandemic, we do so in a way that really supports business to maximise the opportunities of a net zero economy and a green recovery. Investing in change, in this chapter, we really, you know, look at the challenge we face in funding change. We did some research last year, 18 months ago, with Edinburgh University and Leeds University, which looked at the economic impact of delivering a net zero city. Really positively, it did show that we can get 67% of the way there with technology that exists now, with investments that will pay for themselves. But front loading that investment and how you make the case and find the resources to invest early in those changes that will pay dividend is still challenging. The strategy sets out that, you know, first and foremost, we want to maximize our own investment choices. We want to collaborate, particularly public sector and public body investment, to make sure that it's leveraging as much change as possible and that we're maximizing its opportunity. We want to put Edinburgh at the forefront of the many, many opportunities coming out of public and private Scottish Government and investor bodies looking for a home for both grant and investment in net zero projects and programmes of work. And we want to innovate, and particularly in how the public and private sectors collaborate to shared benefit to deliver this change over the longer period. So there's a lot I haven't covered in that talk through the chapters, but I'm just going to pull out a few of the more strategic actions across those chapters over the next few slides. Next slide. So throughout those chapters, what we're thinking about with the strategy is how we create the right conditions for key city partners and sectors to take climate action and to do so with some speed. So we're looking at ensuring that we have the right policy, regulatory and infrastructure conditions that support net zero behaviour change. That, you know, focuses on key documents like the 2030 City Plan, which will really shape where and how the city grows over the next decade, and making sure that it does so in net zero ways that create sustainable communities and local economic opportunities. We're looking at, I mentioned, the City Mobility Plan, investing very much in a public transport and active travel hierarchy, but also thinking about the place of EV. We do look at and think about, well, what positive role could there be for workplace parking levies within this, and how would it unlock and support the type of positive investment and change we would want to see. We think about EV and public service charging hubs in the first instance, but we raise the challenge that we need to address over the longer term generally with EV infrastructure, and how we collaborate with investment that's happening now individually and make sure that connects the city in really positive ways. And we focus in on identifying and understanding the cost of not taking action so that we can unlock collective investment to really mitigate and build a resilient city. Across all the chapters, we're thinking about how we can be greater than the sum of our parts. This strategy is not a plan of plans. So we are not thinking about how we collate all the projects and programs that individuals, too much going on in this city to do that and to do it meaningfully. What we want to do is think about, well, what's the benefit of collaborating across the shared challenges we have in driving net zero action, and how do we unlock speed and impactful decisions now? So particularly in the space of heat and energy, we are thinking about the establishment of a heat and energy delivery partnership, which brings partners who are investing in heat and energy generation and distribution together to design a strategic plan for the city's needs, current and future, and build a heat and energy master plan for that unlocks and gives confidence, long-term confidence to partners looking to invest in individual and joint projects across the city over the next decade. We're entering into a strategic partnership with Scottish Power Energy Network so that we can ensure that we, with SPEN, align the grid development, the investment that they will make in grid development in the city over the next decade to our strategic heat and energy master plan and the city's needs. Again, taking cost, making it more efficient and more effective to invest in this city. And we're also going to bring together that energy efficient public buildings partnership to think about and ensure that we can collaborate and share knowledge. We can share feasibility work. We can align our investment plans. We can think about how we share those more strategically together with the city so that, you know, business and the supply chain that we will be looking to collaborate with has foresight of what the opportunities might be and can invest with confidence in both the skills and the supply chain that they might need in order to bid for and maximise from that investment opportunity being made by the public sector. Next slide. We also are very cognizant as we do that top-down strategic supporting kind of context that we're also thinking bottom-up. As a city, if we are to be net zero, it automatically means that we need to be net zero households, we need to be net zero communities. So building on the city's strategic commitment to 20-minute neighbourhoods, making sure that those neighbourhoods support net zero action, that we're thinking not just of 20-minute service neighbourhoods, 20-minute transport neighbourhoods, but we're also thinking about 20-minute energy communities and maximising the potential that exists bottom up. And within that, how we can scope some of the smaller individual citizen and community grassroots activity and really support that and unlock any barriers that might exist to net zero community development. And finally, we are understanding that while we're taking that strategic, collective, collaborative kind of framework over the 10 years, that at the same time, there is a lot of individual activity that needs to progress, and we need to encourage and support those organisations and sectors really pushing individual commitments. We need to expect people as well to really increase their level of individual ambition and encourage them to do so. And some of the ways in which we highlight this, and Chris will talk a little bit more about this, is the work of the endorsing and supporting the work of the Edinburgh Climate Commission in their launch of the Climate Compact. We are setting aside, the council has provided a budget for public campaigns that will not only look at how you share information about the best way to take climate action, but will connect that to funding availability and opportunities so that people can act with some confidence. Next slide. I'm going to hand over to, in that individual commitment kind of context, I'm going to hand over to Chris now, just to drill down a little bit into the business skills in the net zero economy chapter and talk a little bit about what the strategy says in that space and say a bit more about the Climate Compact. Chris?
Okay, thanks, Paula. Hi, everybody. My name's Chris Adams. I'm a strategy manager in Paula's team in the council, and I focus on things like economy strategy more generally, but specifically in this context, the economy elements of the climate strategy work. I think, as Paula said, this chapter in the strategies is very much about what we need to do to make sure we have a net zero economy by 2030, and that the economy, Edinburgh's businesses are making the contribution, the changes that we need if we're going to meet that net zero target overall. And I guess in the way that we're describing that is very much about not just what do businesses need to do, but also where are the opportunities and why is this a right and an important thing for Edinburgh's economic recovery and Edinburgh's economic prosperity over the next decade and beyond. And within that, we've set really three outcomes that we're aiming for. And those are that we need to make sure that Edinburgh's recovery is one that is sustainable and resilient to future crises. So obviously we've just gone through a crisis, we're still going through a crisis at the moment, and there are more to come. Climate change is one of those, but we think that a lot of the adaptations and the changes that we can make in respect to climate change will help us to be more resilient and more a successful economy in general, whatever the crisis comes. A part of that is making sure that Edinburgh can have a vibrant circular economy. Now, this is a lot of work that I know that Mayan and colleagues in the Chamber are particularly passionate about encouraging circular economy practices across the city, and we'll talk about that no doubt through the Q&A. And others would certainly a key issue there about all those points about resource efficiency and resource use and well-being are core to what we're trying to achieve. And finally, bringing it right down to people, saying that net zero economy, that transition to net zero economy can't be done, shouldn't be done with by exacerbating the inequalities that we have in Edinburgh's city and the labour markets at the moment. So again, as we're making that transition, what can we do to make sure that the jobs that are created are good quality jobs, are fair jobs, that people from across the city can access? So basically getting the skills, the retraining, the education work programs in place to make that happen is what we're focusing on. So those are the outcomes. That's what we mean when we're talking about a net zero economy. That's what we're trying to get to as a kind of big outcome strategic space. But we are trying to be very practical about what it will take to do that. And on the right-hand side of the slide there, you have some of the steps that we want to focus on. Now, key thing here for us is that this is a consultation. That means we don't have all the answers to every part of that at the moment. And what we're hoping to do is through this session and others over the next few months is build on our thinking so far to be really practical and really granular about what some of these ideas mean. But from the work that we've done so far, essentially those steps that we need to do to be that net zero economy kind of come down into three kind of groupings, I think. The first one's about money. So in order to make that transition, we need to make sure that we are connecting investment to opportunity. We know that we have good potential green low carbon developments in the city. We know we have good businesses who have the ideas and the innovations and the skills to move into new low carbon industries. But the challenge is getting the investment to them the right way. So what do we need to do that? To unlock, to connect, to influence investment, and to make sure that our investments opportunities and portfolios are profiled and in the best possible state. Second bit about procurement. Now we talk about public sector procurement a lot, but I think this goes equally for large corporates. How can we make sure that all the spend that's made in the city is being used and targeted in a way that supports local net zero businesses? And in particular, I think there's something here for circular economy opportunities, particularly in the way that large procurements, whether it's through facilities management, through other kind of procurement streams, can be used to create markets for businesses to grow into. So trying to think creatively about how we use that spend to create the opportunities that help businesses to move on and bring their ideas to life. So a lot of work to do there, actually. And the final bit in the money idea is about how do we incentivize and support businesses to make that transition to net zero, to take practical steps to being a net zero business. And something in there is around financial incentives, grants, challenge funds, and those kind of ideas. All about trying to focus on the lead markets where we think we've got opportunities, supporting businesses of any type to make their steps. So money is a huge part of the picture in here, and getting that right is going to make us more successful. It's not just about money though. We think there's a huge role to be played here for what you might call support and advice and mentoring. Now, we already have pretty strong business support ecosystem, whether it's the Chamber, FSB, Business Gateway, lots of agencies working to support businesses to grow and develop. But how far, what changes do we need to make in that ecosystem to help to make sure that support is doing everything it can do to help businesses make that practical step towards net zero? And so we have a discussion in there, and part of that again is about Circular Edinburgh, and Mine can talk maybe later about precisely what that project does to help businesses, but both in terms of support and mentoring, profiling, championing. Some of this is about practical skills, some of it is about confidence and championing and giving role models. And the final bit in there that in that advice side is the Climate Commission. So the Climate Commission have their Climate Compact, which is a specific accreditation scheme to help businesses to profile and take real steps to reducing their emissions. What we're looking to do is to help to promote that and take that scheme on so that it is something that all businesses can sign up to. We'll say a bit more about that in a moment. But the final strand of these strategic actions that we need to take is around skills. So again, coming back to that point about good green jobs that anyone can access. If we're going to have businesses that can thrive and people that can thrive in that economy, we need to make sure that both those labour supply and demand is connected. So where we have new markets emerging, do we have the skills to fill the jobs that that's going to create? Do we have a local workforce that is able to access the skills and retraining and education they need to get into those areas? When we're in those, when people have those skills, do we have businesses that are able to create real rewarding careers for those workers? And it's in that space that we need a lot of work with university, with colleges, with schools, and with businesses to create that pipeline, those pathways of work in the kind of new sectors and changing sectors that we're talking about. So those are the strategic actions that we're talking about in the strategy under net zero economy, and we have a few questions that we'll come back to at the end where we're looking for a bit of help in fleshing these out. This is a developing framework for us. But before we move on to that, I do want to say just a little bit more about that Climate Compact piece. So if we can have the next slide, please, Rebecca. Thanks very much. So Climate Compact is, as I said, a programme that's been put together by Edinburgh's Climate Commission, who are this independent group who are steering a lot of the work towards net zero. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to set out a commitment, an evidence of commitment that Edinburgh businesses can sign up to and show what they are doing to make that shift towards a net zero economy. And what it does is it asks businesses to do a number of things. First of all is to publish their own plans for how they're going to cut their own carbon emissions. And in doing that, look at how they are embedding low carbon across their supply chain, look at how they are communicating and acting as an influencer and a leader for net zero, in particular about how they are promoting climate literacy amongst their staff and their workforce in general. Transport's a huge part of this. So in that plan to cut carbon emissions, how are businesses taking on the challenge of sustainable travel? And this is a major issue for lots of businesses. But what are the practical steps that businesses, firms are taking? And some of that might be about limiting need to travel to work, promoting rail travel, switching to zero emission fleets. It's going to be different for every business, but asking for real thinking and real evidence of work that's there. And the final piece is the one that's Paula highlighted as a major challenge across all sectors, is building. So what are businesses doing? What are they able to do to make their own premises more low carbon? And that's about retrofitting estates, it's about energy sources, it's about a lot of the things that we talk about when we're in a circular economy argument discussion. So all of that are the kind of things that the Commission is asking businesses to think about. And at the moment, what they've been doing is taking this compact and designing it really and targeting it quite large corporates, businesses across Edinburgh, and being quite successful in getting some pretty notable sign-ups over the past few months since it was launched. Next step then is to take it further and to say, how can we make this sort of process and this sort of way of self-challenging and self-checking and public statement of commitments, how can we make that something that's more appropriate and more accessible for a wider pool of businesses? And so to do that, they're talking to different business groups about making this, redesigning the process to make it more accessible to everyone. And that's the next step that we want to see. If we're successful in this, then you can see us tying these sort of actions and these sort of checks and way of thinking about net zero into some of the other things we've talked about before, about identifying skills, about mapping support, using the information that we get from these into helping to tap into mentoring schemes or different ways of incentivizing change. So a really important project and something that we're hoping to see grow in profile over the next year or so. We are talking a lot, so I'm going to just pause and pass on to Paula to finish off our slots. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. I'll try the rest of the slides. Hopefully we can go quite quickly. Next slide. What you will see across the strategy as well in all the thematic areas and the chapter headings is that while we're making those longer term plans, we're also trying to, in the here and now, make sure that we encourage, support and identify where partners and action in the city is being taken so that we can innovate and learn. There's a lot that we don't know in terms of, yes, there's lots of technology available to solve particular problems, but what's the right technology options for us in the context that we have? How do we build the right business cases around them? How do we test that innovation? And how do we learn how to deliver those projects in really effective and efficient ways? So, you know, we're highlighting where those innovation and learning projects are happening at present, and we'll continue to do that through the life of the strategy. Next slide. The strategy also recognises that we don't actually have, you know, I mentioned that the stat that research had shown we can get 67% of the way there with investment and technology that exists now and pays for itself. But we also know that 30% there's a gap in terms of both regulation, powers, funding and technology that needs to be filled between now and 2030. And you know, we're very clear and transparent about that in the data and the evidence that we hold. And so throughout the strategy, we make calls on Scottish and UK government to support not only councils, but also organisations, businesses and citizens to take action. Some of that's around being less siloed in the funding packages that they're putting out. Some of it's about being more empowering in terms of the frameworks of powers and policies that we have. And some of it's about gaps in terms of funding for particular sectors and services and citizens. So I won't detail where those come across the work of the organisation, just of the strategy, just to say that they are there. And if you have any particular views on what more we should be saying to the various layers of government, then that would be welcome input also. Next slide. So just to say that we have committed to a 12-week consultation, and I think that ends on, I should know this, but the first week of September. We have a survey that's out, which I hope all of you will link to and fill in. The consultation survey is, you can actually leap to the various chapters that you wish to fill in. You aren't forced to comment on the whole 108 pages of the document. There are some key questions common to all, and then you can move forward quite quickly to particular chapters if that helps with finding the time to complete the strategy. But we're also having engagement workshops like this to make sure that we're reaching out and hearing and engaging with key stakeholders. And we will draw the findings of that together before we finalise the strategy. We are looking specifically not just at the strategy, but the next steps within it in order to develop an implementation plan, which has more detail and depth to it. And again, input around the role of businesses in different sectors and what more or different, or indeed what you would look to contribute to that would be gratefully received. The intention then is to take a final strategy with a draft implementation plan to committee in October, and for us to publish that and continue the work with that buy-in beyond COP26. Next slide. This provides a number of links that might be useful to you that you can go to see both what we're doing, what other people are doing, particularly around the Climate Compact, and also directing you to some of our engagement activity. Next slide. And so we had some questions for you, which I know we'll come back to at the end, but I just wanted to flag them so that as you listen to the next presentation, you can think about them. Next slide. And it is really around, are the strategic outcomes, particularly for the net zero economy chapter, in the right space for you? What else could or should the strategy do to help businesses to make the transition? What works in terms of support to businesses, and who is best placed to help deliver that? It's not always the usual suspects. And importantly, what blockages do you experience generally, but also to investors actually investing in green businesses and supporting you to unlock the positive opportunities that a green recovery and net zero business model can capitalise on? So I'll pause there. Happy to take any particular questions, but I know it's a fairly long presentation, so you may park those for the engagement and discussion section.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks, Chris. That was really useful. I think what we'll do, Paul, if that's okay, we'll just do the question. We'll carry on. We'll just do questions and the debate later on. As Chris highlighted, one of the outcomes is for the city to have a vibrant circular economy. And as Paula explained, if 54% of the current emissions are from citizens, the circular economy really gives an opportunity for citizens and businesses to be empowered and engaged to make change within an organisation. So I'm delighted to introduce May Michelle, co-director of Ostrero. Ostrero is a circular economy business that we've supported for the last 3 years. So I will pass it over to you, May. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayan. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all here today. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what we do at Ostrero and why we decided to set Ostrero up as a circular economy business, and what benefits that circular economy framework has given us as a business. And I'll also touch at the end on some of the barriers we've met along the way, because it's not all plain sailing. It was really interesting to hear there about Edinburgh Council's plans for 2030, and there were a lot of things that I was nodding away at, which resonate closely with what we're doing. So why we decided to set up initially was I co-founded Ostrero in 2016 with my colleague Marion Brown, and we'd been thinking for a long time about setting up a business that could mitigate what was happening with the climate emergency, but we couldn't quite find the right framework for that. And then in the middle of the night, one night, I heard Ellen MacArthur talking on the radio. I'm sure lots of you will have come across her and her work, but she won the world record for sailing single-handedly around the world at quite a young age. And she was talking about how she had a real moment of epiphany where she was on her boat all alone in the middle of the ocean. And she had a moment of thinking all the resources that she had, her food, her water, her materials, had to last her for the entire trip. If she used up the resources too quickly, the trip was over and she was out of the race. And she had this moment of epiphany that it was like a metaphor for the world, where the resources of the world are finite, but we're living as if they were infinite. We're just using things up too quickly, using them maybe only once or twice, and then chucking them away without really worrying as where they end up. So she came back, gave up sailing, and set up the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a charity dedicated to promoting the circular economy. So after hearing her talk so eloquently about that, I phoned Marion the very next day, and we knew that we'd found the framework for what we wanted to do, and that the circular economy offered us that framework. So I'm just going to share a few images for the next bit. Bear with me one second while I get these up. So think about why we decided on the circular economy. Can you all see that? No.
Yeah, we can see that fine.
The linear economy that we live in just now, so that take, make, use, dispose model, is just disastrous and really not sustainable at all. Friends of the Earth estimate that globally we're using the resources of 3 planets every year. And if you extrapolate those figures for Scotland, sorry, it's 2 planets globally and 3 for Scotland. So we're using up 3 times as many resources as we actually have. Resources are running low and are getting increasingly hard to extract. So indium, that's the picture on the right, that's the material on your mobile phone that makes it touch responsive, only has enough left for another 12 years if we continue to extract it at current levels. Silver in the middle there has 17 and oil 37. And this decrease in resources is against a background of a rapidly expanding global population. We're expecting another 3 billion people in the next 30 years. So we need, as a society, as a global society, to work out how we can use our resources more sensibly and share them more fairly. And there's waste in so much of what we do. It's estimated that in Scotland, £50 million worth of gold has ended up in landfill in the last 4 years through e-waste. So throwing away mobile phones, iPhones, laptops, all of which have gold and many other precious minerals and resources in them, and they literally end up on the rubbish heap because our current linear economy doesn't give us a framework for what to do with these really valuable resources. We just end up chucking them away. And gold, which is really that kind of most mythical of resources, is literally ending up on the rubbish heap. And there's waste like that in so much of what we do. So cars, these are figures for across Europe. Cars sit unused 92% of the time. A power tool is used for 13 minutes in its whole life, and we waste 33% of food. So if you think about all the resources, the energy, the materials that are going into creating and producing all these things, only for us to really not use them at all, they're just being wasted. In contrast, the circular economy gives us options like sharing or leasing services where we think much more carefully about how we use the resources to really make the most of them instead of wasting them as we are just now. And the impact on biodiversity and wildlife of our current linear economy is also disastrous. Friends of the Earth estimate a 60% decline in species populations since 1960. And a local story to illustrate this is Lulu, the orca whale. So we go to the island of Tiree every year on holiday, and it has beautiful, clean, clear waters. It looks like the least polluted place on Earth. But this orca whale, Lulu, was washed up on the beach a few years ago. And when scientists did tests on her body, they found that she was one of the most polluted animals anywhere on the planet. She had so much plastic in her system that she had never been able to have a calf. And they think that the whole pod will just go extinct because of all the waste that's going into the ocean. And that's happening across all sorts of different species and animals. And of course, that's just another illustration of the whale eating all the wrong things. Of course, climate change. This is a picture from the floods in Europe last week, where 160 people lost their lives. And actually, I just arrived in London this morning and found that my friend's flat was under an inch of water from the floods on Sunday. And suddenly, I think, not suddenly at all, but it feels that it's coming much closer, that climate change is no longer something we can think about as far away or in the future. It's happening here, it's happening now, and it's having really disastrous impacts on us as a society and on the environment. So that's the bad news. The good news is the circular economy gives us a really good framework to deal with a lot of these things. And the primary aspect of it that we deal with is in designing out waste. So it actually enables us to think about how we can get rid of all that waste that I was just talking about just now. And 80% of waste happens at the design stage. So if you can really get the design stage right, you can already get rid of so much waste before you even need to think about what happens at the end of life. So a circular economy enables us to keep materials at their highest level for as long as possible, and thereby make really good use of those precious and increasingly scarce resources. It's environmentally beneficial because it cuts toxic waste and it uses renewable energy, and it brings financial and informational benefits for companies that work on those principles. So that's all the things that we were thinking about as we set up Austrero and how it could be a good structure for business. As we were researching the circular economy, we found that the biggest gap, and this is, I was thinking about this a lot as Paula was speaking, that the lack of knowledge or the lack of information out there about the circular economy. So people might have heard of it, they might have a vague idea of what it is, but it's very difficult often to break through the jargon and to really see how it can practically translate into what you do in your business or in your home or in your organization. So what we really want to do is change mindsets so that people can see, for example, the 2030 strategy from Edinburgh Council, see that there and understand why we need to get there, and then have practical changes in their behaviours to enable them to get there. This is a picture from Mad Men. I don't know if any of you know this series, but I remember watching this, and there's a scene where the Draper family in outside New York go on a picnic and it all looks idyllic and perfect. And then at the end of the picnic, they stand up, shake out their picnic blanket, and they leave the bottles, the rubbish, everything on the ground. And you think that it was shocking as a viewer in 2020 to watch that and think you wouldn't just leave all that litter on the ground. But in the 60s, maybe nobody batted an eyelid. So mindset change about how we behave, how we interact with our environment, our responsibility towards the environment can change. And that's the key to what we do at Austrero. So the primary aim of Austrero is to grow the circular economy in Scotland through mindset change and through behaviour change following on from that. So we do this by telling the story of the circular economy and how it can be good for you and for your organisation. We currently have 4 main areas of work. So the first one is making circles, and this is our work with schools. We've been doing this since 2018, and we work with schools right across Scotland, so from the Highlands and Islands down to the borders and everywhere in between. And we work with children from primary 3 to S3, and we deliver design and making workshops on the theme of the circular economy and circular design. So the workshops have a dual aim. The first aim is to introduce the circular economy to children, to get them to understand how it can be a really positive framework going forward. And then the second aim is to equip them with skills that will be practically helpful in a circular economy. So that's looking at really practical steps that they can take to cut out waste at home and at school. And also in the actual making, to use skills that are getting increasingly lost in our digital age. So we've found 15-year-olds that couldn't tie a bow, 17-year-olds that couldn't thread a needle, and primary 7 children who couldn't hold a pair of scissors properly. So these very, very basic hand and repair skills that are really getting lost are something that we're trying to encourage and bring back in, because in a circular economy, we're all going to need to understand how things are made, why they're designed like that, and how we can repair them ourselves, because it's so easy at the moment, if something breaks, just to chuck it away, like we saw with those mobile phones on the rubbish heap. We also look at softer skills like resilience and adaptability, thinking about the skills that children will need going forward, because so many of the jobs, as Chris was saying, that they'll be doing in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time aren't necessarily jobs that we know about now. So it's about getting them to have the right mindset to move forward into the new green economy. COVID-19, of course, meant that we couldn't keep going into schools, so we switched to an online resource, slightly Blue Peter style, where we have films of making and designing and the children can make along with them, and it can be used at school or as a home learning resource. It's free to use, and we brought the outcomes together into an exhibition online with the National Museums of Scotland, and included in the last exhibition a Build Back Better section where children shared their experiences of lockdown and what positive things they thought might come out of lockdown as we move towards a circular economy. So their answers included things like fresher air, less noise pollution, stronger communities. And again, I was thinking, as Paula was speaking about those 20-minute communities, a lot of the things that the children came up with are very much what the strategy is looking at in 10 years. So it's nice to think that they're already thinking about those things, even if it's not in the form of a strategy, but those things are coming out already. And also using technology to enable us to communicate and work differently. We're currently working on a new exhibition capturing children's voices about what they think world leaders should prioritise at COP26. So this is one example from Thomas, who was 8, saying, please, could you stop waste in the world because we're running out of stuff. I thought he says it better than anyone, I think. So the good news in all of this is that young people seem to really get it. It seems to be completely logical to them that we need to look after our resources, that we need to look after our environment, our wildlife, biodiversity, and create a new way of doing things in which waste is a thing of the past. So it's really encouraging in the face of all the bad news we all hear all the time to work with young people and see that positivity. Our second area of work after working with schools is working on the circular economy with businesses, universities and other organisations to help them understand what the circular economy means and how it can be relevant and beneficial to their organisation. So one example of this was working with Belfield Brewery in Edinburgh, and we looked at their whole way their business worked and how you could apply circularity to it. So thinking about things like the plant, how they could make it most efficient, how they might be able to use spent grain, so the waste from the brewing process, to create other products like dog treats, making sure they were being as efficient as possible in terms of lighting and heating using renewable energy sources, and looking at a shared bottling plant for other microbrewers in the area and shared delivery systems. Because one of the things they found was while they were interested in going circular, it's really difficult if you're the only one doing it, because you actually need it to be connected up with logistics, with the electricity providers. It needs everyone to do it at the same time. So it can be difficult if you're a front runner to get it to work fully. But advantages of this approach include a new income stream if you can create a new product from your previously what was considered as waste, saving money on water and electricity, and also creating a meaningful narrative and relationship with your customers and also with your staff, because it's something that resonates closely with them. Circular economy legislation is going to be coming into place, hopefully very soon in Scotland, and we fully expect this to continue developing over the next few years. So building in a circular approach now allows them to future-proof themselves for the years to come. A second example of the work we've done on the circular economy with organisations was with the learning and engagement team at the National Museum of Scotland. And we looked at how they could apply circular economy principles to their interactions with visitors. So for example, looking at the sourcing of materials, the choice of activities and what visitors could go home with. So we did this work through an interactive design workshop with the team so that they could explore for themselves different design approaches like designing for disassembly and transforming waste to value. Advantages of this approach for them included saving money on materials, cutting out on waste, which is obviously good from an environmental perspective, but also had a financial impact because it means less waste having to be paid to be collected. And again, having a meaningful and thoughtful interaction with visitors. A third part of the activity that we do at Ostrero is yo-yo cups. So we're about to begin, just after the summer holidays, a trial of a circular economy leasing system for coffee cups called yo-yo cups. So there are an estimated 200 million disposable coffee cups used in Scotland every year. And the aim of this project is to cut down on that waste from single-use items and to create a mindset change around it so that single-use disposable items become hopefully a thing of the past, and it becomes something that you just wouldn't do, that you would always think of another way to do it. We've seen a big surge in single-use items over COVID, obviously, with masks, gloves, aprons and things. So it's kind of made the job even harder because we've gone, I think, a bit backwards in terms of single-use items. But advantages of a system like this for us as a business include keeping the materials at their highest value, because you're reusing them again and again. And we've chosen to make the cups from stainless steel because it's such a robust material that it can be used so many times and you're really maximizing the value. And when you compare that to a single-use cup where there's a lot of materials and a lot of energy going into making the cup, but it's used once and then thrown away, it's really much more beneficial for us as a business. It gives us improved knowledge of the product because we retain ownership of the product and then we lease it out to cafes and venues, which means that we know what's happening to the cup at all times. And at the end of its life, we can make sure that it's properly recycled. And again, stainless steel is good for recycling because it can be reused as the material that it is as a cup. It means we have zero waste as a company, saving money on waste collection fees, and it means that we have a competitive product, because cafes or venues using this system very quickly start to save money when compared to using single-use disposable cups. And again, building up long-term relationships with customers who want to have a positive environmental impact. For us as a business, it also enables us to really put into practice the question of mindset change and how to achieve this on a practical level, because it's easy to think about it, but when you're actually thinking about how you get the cup into somebody's hand and what they do with it next, it's quite complicated. So it's interesting to see how that actually works. And the final bit of our work at Austrero that we have is around research. So we've been carrying out research into the circular economy since we started, but we're just starting out on a new and really exciting project with Edinburgh University and Edinburgh Napier University, looking at how we could use data and technology to incentivise the creative industries in and around Edinburgh to adopt circular economy principles in their practice. So we're really excited about seeing what will come out of that, and also seeing how we could then apply that to other sectors once we've established how it works for the creative industries. So that's our kind of 4 main areas of work in Austrero. I've touched on a couple of the barriers, because while we really passionately believe that the circular economy is really good for business and good for the environment, there are some barriers to getting there, both for us and for other organisations that we work with. So the first one, which I touched on before, is lack of knowledge, that it can be really hard to actually find out the best way to do things. And it can be a barrier for us in that the circular economy, until quite recently, was a fairly unknown term. So it can be quite a hard sell going into an organisation and saying, we'll let you know how brilliant this is. That is changing, and I have to say, thanks to the work of Circular Edinburgh, that's getting much easier as people are starting to recognise it as something that could be of interest to their business and something that could be positive for that. And the story also becomes easier to tell as more and more businesses are successfully adopting a circular approach, because you have more and more really great case studies to use and show how it actually works in practice. The second barrier, I think, is changing direction. So for big organisations to try and shift where they're going can be really hard. And as Paula was saying, it needs a bottom-up and a top-down approach at the same time. We've sometimes seen examples of organisations where one arm might adopt a circular approach and really go for it, but then you might have another arm of the organisation that's not on board. So for example, if you have a gallery that has an exhibition about climate change, but then the activities surrounding that, or the products for sale on the shop floor, don't reflect those circular values, that can actually be quite bad for an organisation's reputation, because it's a bit more like, it comes across as ticking boxes rather than having a really meaningful circular framework behind the work that they're doing. And the final barrier, again, Paula touched on this, and I guess it's the big one, is cost. It can be expensive to make significant changes to the way you work, but the costs are usually offset and then later outweighed by the savings you make in adopting a circular approach. But it's that upfront funding that can be difficult. So it is helpful to have there is funding from Zero Waste Scotland, and there are various funds around, but again, they can be tricky to access. For us as an organisation, making circles in schools is really our flagship project, and the one that we really feel so passionate about, because I think young people need to have the skills and the knowledge to go forward into a world which will have such different jobs from now. But the circular economy seems to fall between different government departments when it comes to education. So it's not written into the curriculum yet, and we have to find funding to make that happen. So for us, that's the biggest barrier, is getting the funding to make it all happen. But it is happening, and we're getting there. And I think now, after 5 years in a circular economy business, it's really, I suppose when we started in 2016, we had a really good gut feeling about the circular economy, and we thought this is the way to go. But 5 years in business have shown us that it really does make sense environmentally, socially, and as a business, just financially, to go a circular route. So I hope this has shown you just a bit of the work that we're doing as a circular business in Edinburgh. And I look forward to any questions in the next session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary. It's great to hear so much your passion for all the different products that you do. As I said, we've kind of gone along the journey with Austrero, so it's just great to see from even 3 years ago to where you are now. Very busy. You and I are very, very busy when I see all the projects. I realise now that, you know, we've had some really interesting presentations, but really now I want to kind of go over to our delegates just to get some discussions going about the strategy. Obviously, that, as Paula explained, it's for the city, although it's been drafted by the council, but it is for the city, and it needs all the key stakeholders to come together to kind of meet that net zero for 2030. So I was just wondering, do we want to open it to the floor? Either maybe somebody wants to put in the chat box or ask any questions. I know that Mary was talking about funding. We do have information on funding. So I know there's a big Green Jobs Fund, for example. I think that's now closed. So if you are looking for information, then please get in touch. But I was just wondering, is there any questions from the floor? Or have you stunned everybody? Hi, Roxana. Do you want to unmute yourself and just ask the question? Would that be easier?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's so encouraging to hear everything that has been said, and the plans and the actions that will come and that are already happening, actually. So that's really incredible. I have just a couple of things. For example, you mentioned work with the Scottish Government, and how do you relate your net zero plan to the NPF4, which was published in November last year? And also, when you're talking about net zero and emissions, do you refer to scope 1 and 2, or also 3? And how do you monitor the progress? Because scope 3 is already quite. So you mentioned working with along the value chain and supply chain, but how do you expect to monitor the progress?
So our target is a territorial target, and that's in keeping with many of the other cities and general approach around this. So if everybody's focusing on scope 1 and 2, scope 3 is picked up in scope 1 and 2 of other places. In part so that we focus on what we have the direct power to change. So we focus on what is created within the city territorial boundaries. And we also focus on how we maximise our procurement and buy-in power to influence what is in kind of scope 3. But for the purposes of the target, we have set a kind of consistent territorial boundary. And that means that some of the kind of consumerism, and creation of products and businesses that come out with the city, yes, there is a little bit of, grey area around that, but it is a negotiated and consistent kind of territorial boundary that we've set. And that also means that for us as a city, we are fully accountable for everything within that boundary, and we have the powers and the budgets and the authority to make the changes in scope 1 and 2, and to use whatever buy-in power we have to influence scope 3. So I hope that answers your question. It is a tricky one always to, where do you draw the line? How do you kind of, keep the sense of urgency, emergency without drowning in the size of the challenge? And for us, that has been to set a very clear kind of boundary to the target.
Hope that helps. Does that help at all? I'm just going to read out a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
This is from Holly Gadd to everyone. In regard to procurement, will support and participation of the strategy be scored in future council tenders for service provision? They're probably over to you, Paula, again.
Yeah, interesting you should ask that, because we had a conversation with our procurement team yesterday, and I think the short answer is yes. We are, looking at how we incentivize really those businesses and kind of local businesses who are willing to go that extra mile in terms of a net zero business model. That could be in how they purchase their own goods, how they create and develop and make products. It could be in terms of travel around the city and the fleets that people own. And it could be, what we're purchasing, how we're purchasing, and wider kind of impact on local sustainable communities. So we are going to look at our sustainability policy generally in terms of procurement to try and make it far clearer what type of positive behaviours we'd really be looking for. But our desire is to incentivise that positive choices as much as possible through not just the council, but also all public sector procurement. We are going to work with the NHS and other partners to do similarly. And we're also engaging with Scottish Government on what they ask us to report on so that it all ties up nicely in that sense. Chris, do you have something to add?
Yeah, just to say that doesn't mean it's just about saying, putting all the pressure onto businesses to say you must be before you can get access to any procurement. This is as much about raising the carbon literacy and raising the awareness within commissioners in the public sector, not just from a procurement sense, but the teams who are actually procuring services, managing services, to think about where the spending that they're responsible for can be put to positive use from a climate change point of view as well.
And valuing the things that businesses are doing already in that net zero context. So yeah, it's twofold, as Chris says.
Yeah, I think also a lot of corporates are looking at that, they're working with their supply chain and actually awarding contracts to ones that have got those kind of policies in place. So as well as you said, for public sector, also the private sector. I'm just going to read out questions, if that's okay, to our panel. From Gail Barkley, really interesting presentations, thank you. I'd be interested to know if you have any advice on encouraging behaviour change, especially in transiting visitors, e.g. tourists.
Yes, so another one that we do touch on in the strategy. Obviously, it's kind of a strategy of strategies as well. So there are other pieces of work that delve down into the depth of these things, but we are looking at how we promote and encourage, not just through how we market the city, because there's a tension there, how we market the city as a tourist destination. So we're thinking very carefully about that, and are looking at our local market as much as we're looking at other international markets. We're also looking at how we can promote the sustainable visitor, so that kind of guides to, and you know, this material exists, but whether it's adopted widely, so how we can really promote, you know, the use of public transport, you know, using your purchasing power when you're looking for somewhere to stay, making sure that the choices that visitors make encourage businesses that exist in Edinburgh to maximise through consumer power their commitment to net zero. So yes, it is very much in there, and we are thinking more and more about what more we could do to ensure that not just residents and businesses here, but anyone coming into the city really sees us as a green destination and contributes to that themselves, rather than simply coming because it's green and not adopting that ethos.
Hope that helps, Gail. I think also a lot of the big hotels, you know, the big visitor attractions will have their own policies in place, because they will need to have. So that will just be aligned to a lot of the sort of green tourism, I suppose, that the council will be promoting. Is there any other questions from the panel? Okay, Roxana, do you want to come in again?
I just wanted to comment on Gail. So I am the CSR representative for the Waldorf Astoria, the Caledonian Hotel, and our CSR program is travel with purpose. So you travel for business or leisure, but there's always a positive purpose, and that's something that we approach in terms of our community engagement, either volunteering or donating, but as well as looking at our operations. So it all starts with the choices that we make for the guests in terms of making sure that their stay has very low emissions in terms of the food, the procurement of the food, the everything that's on site, and also encouraging guests to be sustainable in terms of where the recommendations that we give them and the partners that we work with. So we were awarded the membership to the Virtuoso Sustainability Communities, and We were the only hotel in Scotland to receive that, and that's because we value what Edinburgh has to offer. We market ourselves as a sustainable property, and that means that we also attract sustainable tourists, or we get a chance to engage with them on these matters once they arrive at our property. So it's a and there are so many hotels that are doing such great work in terms of that, and we're very happy to work together towards maintaining the quality and of what Edinburgh has to offer, and so making sure that everything is sustainable in the end.
That's great. I hope that helps, Gail, but happy to connect if that's interesting. Maybe connect further. Do we have any other questions for the panel?
I've got just to say, obviously, thanks to everybody presenting today, and it's very interesting. One of the comments was, is 10 years enough time? I think kind of being in my industry, in the electrical industry for a long time, 33 years now, well, the sooner you start, the sooner you finish, I suppose, in regards to making it good. There's a lot of work to be done. There's no two ways about that. But if everybody partakes and takes interest, I can see it going in the right direction. But there's a lot of things within even our industry that need to be rectified to make good. If you know what I mean? As the standards of a example of a new build in the city are signed off, the renewable energy that's attached to that potential new build or whatever it is, it seems to be done to a lower spec than what is really needed for the property and stuff like that. But that's a lot of things that need to be done, because I know that planning is awarded prior to decisions are made or changes are implemented in the timeframes. But it's things like that that I hope that the questionnaire, if you like, or the covers, because again, it's back to that same. I watch it happen myself. It goes on consistently, and whether it's a low carbon fan you fit instead of a normal fan, or a more long life alarm detection unit for the smoke systems, it's the technology's there. But if people are out to get away with a lower specification and a lower price, you tend to find that's what they put in because they can probably make more profit at the other end. And if they're not regulated to that standard, why would they not? And again, they should want to do the right thing, obviously, but the lure of extra money might be more inviting. And again, it's, I think, guidance and obviously legislation with that. And maybe, I don't know how you incentivize that, obviously, but if the volume moves from the cheaper item to the higher spec item, surely the price will come down because of the production being higher anyway. So it's, from my point of view, that's the only thing I can add today. Obviously, I look forward to looking at the full document. Obviously, 108 pages in my life. I can't wait.
It is an exact summary.
Yeah, I was going to say
it's an exact summary.
Yeah. Sorry, Paul, do you want to?
Yeah. So it's a really interesting point you raise. So the first question is 10 years enough time? No. So the research we've done has already told us we don't have all the powers that we need to get to 2030, but things move fast, and they are moving fast at the moment. We've seen kind of the buy-in to climate action come on leaps and bounds in 18 months, and you know, industry and everybody orientating them towards much more obviously towards kind of net zero as a top priority, not like in the top 10, and we'll get to it if we can. So, you know, currently we know we can't meet it, but that doesn't mean we won't meet it. So we're working on that. You start now, otherwise you'll never get there. And we'll the sooner you start, the less kind of corrective behavior you have to do later on. So every action now is worth 10 later. So let's do more now. So for all of those reasons, 2030 is still a legitimate target, but you know, there are barriers to overcome to get there. The point you raise about construction industry planning, and the city plan will set the highest and push the envelope as far as it can in terms of the regulatory framework for development new build in the city. So our objective is to put the right framework in so that anything future built, but there's a lag, as you've identified, historic planning. And that is a real challenge for us. And so some of this is about how do we influence the construction industry and incentivize those willing to go further, faster, sooner, in order to get us to that place. And some of that's also about making citizens aware of what they're buying and to use their consumer power, which is immense. Like, you know, when you're looking for a house and you go around and you say, I'm not buying this because you haven't done X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to go to another provider who does that, and making people aware so they can provide that feedback is really important, because as you say, people go where the money is. But also, I think we need to give more airtime and positively endorse as much as possible those going furthest. It is challenging though. We want the construction industry ultimately to go faster than the rules will and the timescales allow us to do, and to do that because it's the right thing for the houses that they're building, the people that they're building for, the places that they're creating, and not just be about the bottom line. So I think there's definitely something in there that is going to be a societal pressure. There's not going to be a silver bullet to that.
Good comment.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more question. If there's any other questions, just one last one, because we're getting up to time. Is anybody else? Just check in the chat box before we close up. Any other questions? Paula, are you happy if we share your presentation to share to the delegates?
Yes, absolutely. I think I've got some extra slides at the end, which are summaries of what's in the other chapters, so you don't have to read the 108 pages. But I would say that if there's a particular chapter that you're interested in, we've written it so it's kind of hopefully an engaging read, even though it's a technical subject. So don't be afraid to just dip in and see how you feel about that.
Yeah, so we'll share that presentation. Mary, if you're happy to share your presentation, we can share it if you're happy to do that. First of all, I'd just like to thank our speakers, to Paula, to Chris, to Mary for their time today. Also for our delegates, thank you for attending today. We have had some quite good questions, but is any other information you'd like to input, please do that. We will be sending out a survey. This is a part of 3 roundtable events. So just to let you know, the next one is about the Edinburgh Climate Compact. That's on the 17th of August. And also we've got Positioning the City Net Zero event on the 31st of August. So I hope you were able to attend. Thanks for delegates for coming along today. We really value any input into the strategy. As Paula explained, it's for the city, and all the stakeholders and all citizens have come together to meet that net zero target. We need to work together to be able to look after our planet. So if we can come together, as Paula explained, we also support circular economy businesses. So any support you'd like for us to give, then please just get in touch with myself and the team, and have a great day, and we'll see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody. Bye now.